Greetings and good day. This is The Channeled Truth. I'm your host, Thomas Leichardt, and I'm a channeler myself, and I love exploring the works of other channeled material, including Seth, Abraham-Hicks, Bashar, and other channelers as well. With me today, I have a very special guest by the name of AndRa Skye, and she is a writer, a speaker, and a guide for many others. And so I'm very excited to have her on the show because she's very well versed in the Bashar material. And we are going to have a lovely back and forth dialogue about excitement, passion, the formula, synchronicity, flow, and everything entailed with fourth density consciousness. So welcome to the show, AndRa. And if you have any opening remarks or something you want to open up with, I'm going to give the show over to you for a moment.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for having me. What I'm really excited about these days is flow, talking about flow and going with the flow, because as Bashar says, your flow knows where you need to go. And yeah, I would love to expand on this topic with you.
Very good. So before the show, we were talking a little bit about the formula and how sometimes people get really caught up in the action aspect of it. So just for our viewers out there, the formula in a nutshell is act on your passion to the best of your ability with no insistence on a particular outcome, and of course taking it as far as we can, and then staying in a positive state, right? So people get caught in the action part and being in the flow. Sometimes there's an ebb and a flow, right? There's sometimes a slowing down and sometimes kind of an acceleration. So we've both been working through, and a lot of people have been working through, how do you stay connected when you're in an ebbing cycle, right? How do you pull back? So is there some experience you've had recently perhaps, or some insight about that particular aspect of flow, of slowing down?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to understand here is that ebb and flow are two sides of the same coin. Like, you can't have one without the other. And if you look at nature, there are cycles, there are seasons, there are rhythms to everything, right? And I think, flow is such a cultural buzzword right now. And like, everybody wants to be in the flow and everybody wants, peak performance and to be in the zone, right? But like, I think people are more reluctant to go with the flow when the flow slows down, which it inevitably does, As I said, ebb is part of flow. You can't have one without the other. It's the yin to the yang, right? And like, the idea of rhythm is a universal principle that I think as humans we have kind of lost track of, right? Because there's this societal cultural belief that a lot of us buy into that says you have to go, go, go. And that says you have to be productive. And I think where people get really caught up in this is where they tie their sense of self-worth to what they produce or to what they create, right? And that is what doesn't allow people to slow down when the inevitable ebb comes in, right? So if your sense of self-worth is tied up to what you produce, what you create, then you're never going to allow yourself to slow down. And then when the inevitable ebb comes around, you're going to judge it and you're going to define it as something's going wrong, everything's slowing down, what's happening, right? And I think the issue with that is that if you're not relaxing into the ebb, then you're not really going with the flow, right? This is part of going with the flow. Go with the flow even when your flow slows down. And what does that tell us, when the flow slows down? What is ebb for? It's just the natural process that says, okay, now is the time to go within. Now is a time of inner transformation. And that's why it's going to look like not much is happening on the outside, because it's all happening on the inside, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I can so relate that when I get really caught up in, it's like, things are slowing down, things seem to not be moving. A lot of my negative beliefs can come up in this period. And then I start defining things as, oh, this is an interruption, something's not happening. Because I think I know the timing, but the physical mind, it isn't designed to know the timing of things. And sometimes the slowing down is exactly for processing through the next levels of limitations and how we hold ourselves back, so that we can move forward in the next cycle of growth, right? So I've often found, especially when I was younger, I was really caught in negativity during the downtime, so to speak, right? But now I actually use it in a positive way and start investigating what would I have to believe is true about myself in these situations to be getting these reflections. Or is there a way I'm holding myself back? You know, what am I afraid will happen if I do move forward, right? So all these tools in the toolkit for when we slow down, right? So it's a beautiful process of realizing that is the flow. So I totally agree with that and just wanted to chime in and support that.
Yeah, and the thing about experiencing periods of ebb is that they don't have to be experienced as something negative. And the only reason we experience it as something negative is because we define ourselves by what we do. And, you know, as Wayne Dyer put it, if who you are is what you do, then when you don't, you aren't, right? And so this is where I think it's really, really important to have some kind of sense of self-love, or at the very least self-acceptance, and understanding that you're worthy by your very nature, that your worth is intrinsic. It's not coming from what you do, even when what you do is your highest excitement, right? And I think this is where a lot of people use the formula to kind of beat themselves up over the head with, and use it as yet another standard that they measure themselves against and find themselves coming up short. And I don't think that's precise use of the formula, right? Because if you're using the formula to judge yourself and to say, I'm not following my excitement, I'm not doing this, I can't even do this right? If that's how you're using the formula, then what you're actually doing is you're taking the idea of the formula, but you're applying it to the collective belief you're still buying into, the hustle culture belief that says you are only as worthy as what you produce. And I don't think that's how the formula was meant to be
Oh,
used.
not at all. No.
And I think this is where people get burned out, right? And think about it. What is burnout? Burnout is just a natural signal that your body and your spirit are giving you, telling you you're not flowing with natural rhythms. And the thing is, you can't go against natural rhythms for very long and not experience the consequences of that. And it's like, you know, when you look at nature and you look at seasons, it would be like in the middle of winter saying, I wish this winter would just hurry up and end because I prefer summer. And some people do that, but it's absurd because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't make the winter pass quicker. It doesn't make summer, come around faster. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to those signals. So if you think that you're following the formula, but you end up feeling burnout or exhausted, or you end up with this sensation that suddenly nothing is exciting anymore, that is a really, really good sign that it's time to slow down. And you can only allow yourself to slow down when you disentangle your sense of worth from what you do. Because as long as your sense of worth is about what you do, you're not going to allow yourself to slow down, because you're going to judge yourself and you're going to think, oh, I'm not doing enough. And I think it's important to mention here, Bashar says this many, many times. Your excitement is not always your career or the thing that you do for a living. Resting can be your excitement. And in fact, in times of ebb, that should be your excitement. When things are slowing down, your excitement is to rest and maybe to watch movies or, to just go for long walks. And as long as you don't have that sense of self-worth that says I am worthy even when I'm not doing something, you're not going to allow yourself to be aware of that excitement to rest. You're going to dampen that excitement to rest. You're going to mask it, and you're going to mask it as anxiety, right? And you're just going to say, I don't have time to rest. I can't slow down, right?
Or I need to be acting all the time, or I'm not acting on the formula, right?
Right. But resting is acting on the formula if
Exactly.
that's what you're excited about in the moment. Watching a movie is acting on the formula if that's what you're excited about in the moment.
And you never know, that movie could be the thing that gives you an idea, a spark that your spirit's trying to get through to you. And it's saying, oh, it'll come easiest if you just relax and watch this movie, and the next big idea is going to come. And you're like too busy trying to, mental your way through it, right? Trying to be like, oh, I need to figure this out. I need to move forward, right? So yeah, I totally agree with that. And that flow state is about recognizing that we don't really know at this level, but we follow that excitement, the natural inclination to do what we love to do, even when it's rest and relaxation, when it's taking a walk on the beach, getting our feet wet in the water, and not saying, oh, that's silly. Oh, I need to be working on my career all the time and moving that forward, because then we start pushing, right? And we start going from like we're supported by the universe and it's just flowing through us to like, oh, now we're starting to shift into, oh, now I'm going to push this. Oh, I need this to be done. We create these artificial ideas of it needs to be done by this certain amount of time, and we start tensing up. And then you're not in the formula anymore, right? You're actually trying to push, and then there's resistance in that, right? So yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying.
Absolutely. And that's what happens when you're pushing. It's because you have insistence. Because you think things should happen in a certain way, in a certain timeline. And the only reason you think that is, again, going back to the idea of self-worth, is because you think that your worth is coming from this thing that you're doing. And if you can just produce something that you can then show the world and point to and say, I did this, that then somehow you'll be worthy. And people have this idea that if I can just do enough, I'll be enough, right? And that's completely backwards, because you can never do enough to be enough. But if you know that you already are enough, then you can do all the things you need to do in their perfect timing, right? And I think our biggest challenge right now is to unlock ourselves from the cultural belief, right? Because everywhere you look, our culture says hustle. It says you should be doing things all the time. And no wonder people are burning themselves out, because that's not how nature works. And we are part of nature. We can't segregate ourselves and say, yeah, well, maybe the entire universe functions on this principle of rhythm, but I am going to go, and just go.
Push, yeah.
Because this is where my worth is coming from, right? And I think when you get that sense of self-love, and when you start to appreciate yourself for who you are instead of what you do, then you can apply the formula more precisely. And then you can allow yourself to be excited about resting, to be excited about these ebb periods. And instead of seeing them as something going wrong or seeing them as a punishment, you can see them as like a little mini vacation that you get. Like nature is gifting you with this opportunity to rest. And when you can get excited about that, and when you can allow yourself to enjoy that, the paradox, of course, is that as soon as you relax into it, it doesn't take as long, right? Because you're using the situation in the way that it's meant to be used. You're allowing yourself to relax so that the inner transformation can happen. And when you use the situation how it's meant to be used, then it doesn't have to stick around longer.
Yes.
And I think this is where, people get stuck in ebb because they resist it. And, nature is not in a hurry. So nature is like, I have all day. So if you're going to resist, this is going to just take longer and longer and longer. And I mean, I've experienced this where I've been in ebbs for years because I couldn't unlock myself from the resistance of what I thought should be happening, right? And this year was the first time when I started experiencing one of these ebb periods, and I finally saw it for what it was. And I finally relaxed into it. And not only, I enjoyed it. It was relaxing. It was refreshing. And then suddenly things started happening, and things went from 0 to 100 in like a matter of days. And I was like, wow, that's all I needed to do was just relax and stop pushing.
Right.
So funny, isn't it?
There's a great saying here that I'm reminded of, and it's from, I believe, Taoist practice, right? And it says, nature does not hurry, yet nothing is left undone, right? And it's this whole idea of letting the current take you, right? It's what Abraham-Hicks talks about as going downstream instead of trying to paddle upstream, right? Going against the current, that's exhausting. Going with the current, especially when the current is slowing down, let it carry you, right? Let it support you. And in Qigong, we also have this idea of dropping into the Wuji, dropping into our stance. And there's this pivotal point when you realize the stance is supporting you instead of you trying to orchestrate the stance in a certain way, right? And you just enter this incredible flow state in the body, and you're realizing the structure of the body, it's almost as if the body moves you instead of you're trying to orchestrate it and force it into place and be all, tight about it. Right, so it's all about just kind of riding that current. But I think you really hit the nail on the head when you brought us into self-love, because I've listened to a lot of these channelers. Seth, I've read a lot of Seth. I've listened to a lot of Abraham-Hicks and a lot of Bashar, right? And they all say this, but they all kind of stress different aspects, right? But they all say self-love is supremely important. But I feel like none of these channelers really kind of run with that. But I feel like for me in my life, that's when things really shifted, is when I realized I can love myself as I am, including my negativity, including my resistance, including the angry parts, the sad parts, the hurt parts, and all the resistance they generate. And I can just embrace myself as I am. And I don't have to produce great works of art or great, whatever it is, great treatments, whatever it is that we're engaged in, right? It's already built in. Existence already, you have value. Like, boom, done, you have value. And now you start acting from that, and then you act when you're inspired. But when you're not inspired, you don't act, you slow down, right? And it's okay, because you have value, right? Versus getting caught up in the, oh God, I need this treatment to work so that I can feel better. I need to produce this great video. I need to keep producing because I don't feel like I'm enough, right? The belief is, I already am enough. Right? And then you just kind of relax, and then it's like, oh, now I'm getting the inspiration, right? So that's beautiful. I just wanted to riff on that a little bit, because self-love has just been so powerful for me in the last, and really in this year, it's really come in very, very strong.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and in fact, I would say it's the thing that has made the most difference in my life and in my experience, because as I said, until you have some amount of self-love, or at the very least self-acceptance, right? Because it's a journey to self-love, right? For most of us who have been kind of raised to be very judgmental of ourselves and very critical of ourselves, what I've noticed, and I haven't been able to jump from the point where I was hating myself to the point where I was loving myself. It was a journey, and it went through self-acceptance. And it's interesting because as I stopped beating up on myself and criticizing myself, and I reached this place of self-acceptance, I thought that was self-love because I just didn't know any better. I thought that was it. And it already felt so much better than what I was doing before, right? But it turns out that's just kind of the halfway point in the journey. But what happens if you can get yourself to that place of self-acceptance, I think that's like the 51% mark, where if you get there, the energy momentum will take you into self-love, where you don't even have to do much. You just have to stop beating up on yourself. Right? And that was the big thing for me, where, for me, it wasn't an instant change. It was a matter of pattern interruption. It was a matter of every time I caught myself having those negative thoughts or those critical thoughts of myself, I would stop and say, I don't do that anymore. I don't talk to myself that way anymore. And before that, it just happened automatically because it's just how I always thought my entire life. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that they're doing it. A lot of people don't even realize how much they're beating up on themselves. But there's a very simple way to become aware, which is to just ask. Because if you ask, if you tell your higher mind, show me where I'm being negative and critical of myself, you will suddenly find yourself just becoming aware as you're doing it. And awareness is the key, because as soon as you become aware of it, then you have the choice to stop doing it or to engage in a different pattern.
Yes. Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of highlight something you brought in, because it's kind of like a tender moment of honesty and vulnerability, right? You mentioned self-hate, and I'm putting this out there too, that I was brought up, the patterning that I've experienced was literally self-hate and judgment, criticism, and it really literally went into hate, like I hate myself kind of stuff. And it was like, coming home to realize that that was a predominant energy state. And then you wonder why things are just so tight and constricted and painful, right, in third density. And a lot of us, we sometimes have a hard time looking at our own negative beliefs, because it's like we don't want to know how much we hate ourselves, right? But to embrace that, and to at least, first of all, like you said, have consciousness that this is the case, right? Let's just take a look and realize, oh my God, I have all these self-deprecating, self-hating patterns of behavior, right? And now, as Bashar says, once you know the pattern and a habit, it's not a habit, now it's starting to become a choice. And you start bringing that consciousness in there, and you start asking yourself, does this really make sense? What do I get out of hating myself? And sometimes there's other negative beliefs attached to it, like, well, if I hate on myself, then I'll keep myself from putting myself out there again and getting hurt again, right? So you have to really start untangling that whole web of why we have the compulsion to beat up on ourselves, judge ourselves. Oftentimes it is to prevent ourselves from, quote unquote, being hurt again, right? If I really beat myself up. Or the other one, the insidious one, well, if I beat myself just enough, maybe finally I will improve, right? That's another one I had to wrestle with. It's just like, oh, I just kick myself one more time. I'm going to get this at some, you know what I mean? It's just like, if I just kick myself hard enough, maybe next time I won't make that stupid mistake, right? And then you realize it's all nonsensical, because that's exactly the thing that keeps you in third density, right? And it self-perpetuates. It's got this mechanism and it just keeps rolling. So I just wanted to touch on that, because it's kind of like a moment of honesty and vulnerability, and it's not always easy to admit how negative we are with ourselves, how deeply we sometimes have entrained patterns of self-despisal and self-hate. So may that liberate somebody out there who's watching this, right?
Right, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And I have had that same experience. And in fact, I hated myself so much that I was literally slowly killing myself, because I didn't see the value in my life. I didn't see any reason for me to be here. And the thing about it that I realized later on is that none of these things belong to us.
Yes.
Bashar says, if it's heavy, it's not yours. And so where do we get these things from? Well, we get them from our parents, and we get them from our schooling, and we get them from society. And I think this whole idea of discipline, and how our parents, most of our parents have this kind of mentality as well, where if I beat up on them just enough, then they'll stop screwing up, right? But the whole idea about, beating yourself up so that you don't make mistakes is absurd when you understand that there are no mistakes, right? When you understand that everything happens for a reason, and everything happens the way it's supposed to. And when you trust the way your life unfolds, as Bashar says, then you don't have to do that, because you realize whatever comes and however you react is what's supposed to happen. And if you react in a way that's not aligned with who you are, you're going to see that, and you're going to learn something from that. And
exactly.
So it wasn't a mistake, right?
Exactly. It's all about that learning process, right? And so it's being okay with our negativity coming out, and just realizing, instead of beating myself up, oh, I'm a schmuck because I behaved that way, it's like, well, how can I use this in a positive way? Well, let's get in touch with that part that's hurting. Let's get in touch with, what's driving this behavior, right? Oh, I'm afraid. Oh, I'm afraid this person's going to leave me. Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to get rejected, right? And then you start really using that negativity in a positive way and embracing it with love, self-love, and self-acceptance, right? And then it starts to transform. And that's the paradox, is you can only transform it with acceptance and love, and not by kicking it, right? It's like whoever improves by getting kicked or kicked around, right? You start realizing the nonsensical nature and of these negative beliefs, and liberation, it's there for us. It's amazing. We really can step out of these patterns, and it's literally like transforming dimensional, it's like going from something heavy like water, let's say, to air, right? You just feel lighter, right? It's like that experience in lucid dreaming when you start to levitate, and it's like, wow, we have that capacity, right? And yet we've been loaded down with all these negative beliefs. But part of that is because we came here to transform darkness to light. And so yes, it's not about blaming our parents or our society. It's about realizing we made a choice as a soul to come into great darkness so that we can transform it to light. And here we are. That's why we do what we do, through the healing work, through guiding others and whatnot, is to transform the darkness to light. And that's exciting, right? We can actually get excited about that, right? It's amazing work of consciousness.
Absolutely, absolutely. And all of those fears that you mentioned for which we beat ourselves up, the fear of rejection and the fear of what if this happens and what if that happens, all of that can be traced back to the same idea of self-love, right? Because why are we afraid of that person rejecting us? Because we don't love ourselves enough to know that it doesn't matter. That if somebody pushes you away or quote unquote rejects you, it doesn't say anything about your value as a person. And when you know that, then it doesn't matter as much, right? And I think this whole thing with self-love is such a small shift that makes such a big difference.
Oh, yes.
Because we think we have to learn how to love ourselves, but ultimately we already know that. And whenever a person comes to that realization and that moment of self-love, what happened for me was that I laughed because I realized this was always here. I always had this thing that I've been looking for outside of myself my entire life. It's always been here, and it's a little bit like when you're looking for your keys and they're in your hand. It was kind of like that, and it was so liberating to understand that. And of course, I agree with what you said about we come into our families and our societies on purpose so we can take on these negative beliefs and transform them. And I recently had this vision of us as diamonds, right? And we come in as diamonds, and throughout our childhood and early adult life, we cover ourselves in mud, right? Because we're afraid to shine. We're afraid of shining our light. And I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Like throughout most of our planet's history, it wasn't safe to shine. Who shone too brightly were crucified,
yes,
or tortured, or otherwise, imprisoned or whatnot. And so I think that plays a part in it too, where we go through this process of covering ourselves up in mud, from the little diamond children that we are. And then it's the journey back to ourselves where we get to kind of shake it off and realize, oh my God, I am not this mud that I always thought I was, right? I'm this diamond underneath. And what an exciting journey that is. And what a beautiful realization where suddenly it's like, you never question your worth ever again, because this is who you are. You are this bright light, and it's not what you do that makes you that. It's already who you are. You're worthy because you exist, and you're a facet of all that is.
Yes, I totally agree. That's been my experience. It's a truth you come home to. You can quote unquote practice self-love, catching yourself in negativity, and now I'm going to embrace with love, right? It becomes an intention. You become kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired of yourself, right? And you realize there's another way. But underneath all that is you start realizing you're just coming home to who you truly are. It's not something you have to train yourself into. It's more about untraining yourself from the momentum of the mud, right? And all these definitions and labels that we've been accepted for ourselves, all the limitations. And it's like coming home to yourself. It's just such a beautiful journey. It reminds me of a session that Bashar had a long time ago. Someone came to him and said, Bashar, I'm looking for my one true love. And Bashar just bounces back with, why don't you try looking in the mirror? You know what I mean? Right? And it's just, that just stuck with me so much, because it's like, it's there's the truth right there. It's like we're looking for love in all the wrong places. Validation from the outside. Oh, if I produce enough works, oh, I'll get recognized. Oh, I'm not enough. Well, let me do more and try to become more. right? And then it's just like, you realize, yeah, the absurdity, the cosmic joke is like, oh, it's been right here all along, and we've been searching and searching, and now we realize we're uncovering it within ourselves. So thank you for that diamond analogy, because that, I really resonate with that. And it's just, it's like we're coming into that core of who we know we are this, we are that love that we seek.
Absolutely. And the thing that Bashar said about why don't you look in the mirror, it's one of those things that doesn't make sense until it suddenly does.
Yes.
Until you really, really feel it, because going back to the journey, right, from self-hate to self-love that goes through self-acceptance. When I reached the point of self-acceptance, and I thought that was love because I didn't know any better. What happened is when the momentum took me all the way into self-love, and I had that feeling in my heart that was exactly the same as when you fall in love with someone else. And I was like, oh, of course, it's supposed to feel like love. It's not just, okay, I'm okay with myself, which is still good, right? But it's supposed to feel like love. And I remember the first time the light bulb went on in my head, well, in my heart, technically, right? But I was listening to a love song, and suddenly it felt like my higher self plugged into my heart. And it was a very physical sensation. It was like warm and fuzzy, right, and bright. And I was hearing this love song as if my higher self was singing to me, and I could feel these two aspects of myself, my higher mind and my physical mind. I could feel them falling in love with each other. And it was just the most beautiful moment of my entire life. And that never left, like that never went away. And it was the moment when everything changed for me, and when I stopped looking outside of myself for what I now know I am.
And the paradox is, we go looking for love in all these places outside ourselves, and when we tap into true self-love, it really just fills in and expands, and then now it overflows. And now you've got so much of this stuff that you're sharing love and expressing it, and now people start reflecting it to you. Maybe not right away, but they start looking at it. Something about you is different. Like, oh, I really appreciate spending time with you. It's like all of a sudden everything shifts because you're no longer dependent on the others to validate you, right? And now it's like the metaphor here that comes up a lot in spiritual practices is, right, you go from being a beggar to being an emperor, right? It reminds me of that Eckhart Tolle story with the beggar on the road, and finally the traveler tells him, well, you're sitting on this thing, have you thought to look inside, And he's been begging all his life, and lo and behold, he's sitting on a big pot of gold, right? And it's like that's a lot of third density, is we're trained to look for validation from the outside, love from the outside. I want to know that I'm okay because the others tell me I'm okay. Oh, so I better fit in, I better play the game, oh, I better not shine too brightly because I get in trouble for that too, right? And so we learn all these patterns so that we can break through them, transform them from darkness to light. And when we tap into that self-love, we start realizing we are that radiant light, and we can share it with others. And that's the beauty and the joy of sharing something that's so abundant, because there's plenty to go around. And then now we're not so fixated on, oh, am I getting rejected? Oh, is this person going to accept me, right? And it's just such a more beautiful way to live. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny that, in my personal experience, the reflections happened almost instantly, like within a couple of weeks. It was just like boom, 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 just people around me reacting differently. And I could feel that I had shifted. I could feel that this was a whole new reality, and everybody's responding differently to me, and everybody's, so much kinder and happier, and suddenly, people want to be around me. And I was almost shocked, because it was like, oh, this was all I had to do. This was it, and it was here all along. And this whole time I was basically that beggar, where I was just like, I just want love, because that's what we all want.
Absolutely.
But it's funny how, like, the people who reject us and the people who don't love us, when we come from that place of being a beggar, they're giving us the greatest gift.
The reflection.
In that rejection, in that pain, they're pushing us to find what we already have, because eventually the pain becomes so great that it's like it triggers that awakening. It's like there's no other direction to go in, and you have to go there, and then you find your treasure, and then you're like, oh wow, I will never have to beg again because I'm an emperor now, or an empress, or whatever. So I love that. I love that metaphor, because that's what it feels like. And then it does overflow, and then you can give it freely and not care about it. Doesn't matter if somebody returns your love or not. It's kind of the thing Bashar said about there's no such thing as unrequited love, because if it's love, you don't need it to be, you're not giving it to get something back. You're giving it because it feels good. And this is one of the paradigm shifting ideas that I've come across, is how you can just be in love because it feels good.
Yes.
Not because you want something from this other person, not because you expect to be in a relationship with them, not because you expect anything, just because the feeling of being in love is delicious, right?
Yes.
And that is so freeing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that ties into the formula, right? Because it's no insistence on the outcome. We act because we love acting, right? We do the thing because we love it, right? Not because we expect something in return, right? And Abraham-Hicks, they're really good at like getting to that good feeling place. Like be in love because it feels good to be in love. Like there's no other, you don't need any other excuse, right? So AndRa, it's been incredible to have you here. I love all the places we visited in this conversation, especially the unpacking the self-love. I feel like that is so important. So thank you for being here. For those of you who want to find out more about AndRa, she has her own YouTube channel. She's also very active in one of the largest Bashar Facebook groups. I believe it's just called Bashar something, a Facebook group. Maybe you can chime in the name.
Bashar, channeled by Darryl Anka.
Yes. So you can find her very actively on there. But we're coming up to that 35, more like 40-minute mark. So we will have AndRa on the show again. And may this episode inspire you to love yourself more deeply, more truly, and to really let go of what the outside world, what you think it's supposed to give to you to feel valid and loved, and tap into that love that's already within yourself. So may this empower you to be more self-loving and to flow that love into all you do. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the show. And we will see you in the next episode.